Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tezenghausen. July 11th, here are the main news stories at this moment. Footage has emerged from the oil depot in Azov, that's in the Rostov region, where local authorities claimed, Ukrainians, you didn't hit anything at all, your drones are clumsy and crooked, and even if you did hit something, we put out everything. Let's take a look at how they supposedly put everything out.
Сейчас весь парк просто сгорит.
As we can see, even the protective nets didn't help. And let me remind you, in Azov, our drones visited 5 oil depots at once, that is, all the ones that were there. And now the Russians are facing a very, very serious crisis there, not just a fuel crisis. I'll talk about that in a moment. Well, the Institute for the Study of War writes that Ukraine has begun a new phase of the Crimean operation. I would look at it more broadly here, not just as a Crimean operation. Meanwhile, in the summary from the Unmanned Systems Forces for last night, do you know how many additional Russian tankers were hit? 28. And that's just in one night. So Ukraine is moving to a new stage of isolating Crimea, but also isolating the entire Sea of Azov. In other words, the Sea of Azov is being closed off to the Russians. By the way, the Russians themselves, today they closed it themselves, but I'll get to that a bit later. The land corridor is very problematic. The sea route is being closed off, and it will only get worse. In other words, Crimea will become an unbearable burden for Putin. Even Russian bloggers are already saying this repeatedly. So the Azov collapse is a systemic blow to the entire logistics of the Russian Federation. Let me start with the scale of the losses. In essence, the campaign of forces. Let's call it the campaign of unmanned systems of Ukraine. This campaign began on the night of July 6th. At that time, 2 tankers were hit, and a coastal terminal in Kerch. And then this campaign just started to snowball. On July 7th, 8 more tankers were lost, as well as a dry cargo ship and a ferry. On July 9th, another 15 tankers were lost. On July 10th, another 12. So in the first 4 days alone, the Command of Unmanned Systems reported 35 tankers hit. Tankers. In 96 hours. By the evening of July 10th, the count had reached 48 vessels, and over the next night, another 28. So as of this morning, 76 ships of the Russian Shadow Fleet have been hit. This is a colossal result. This has led to a crisis for them. Furthermore, Russia was forced to temporarily suspend navigation on the Don-Azov Canal, which connects the Don River with the Sea of Azov. Applications for passage through the Kerch Strait, which connects the Sea of Azov with the Black Sea, have also been suspended. That's it. Blockade. And this is not just a local catastrophe already. So, the key figure for context, I looked at some documents here. The total number of Russian tanker vessels in the Sea of Azov, based on SR satellite imagery, is about 120. Units, meaning most of them are dry cargo ships, the rest are oil tankers. That is, in 5 days, 63% of the entire fleet has been put out of action. Just imagine, these aren't pinpoint strikes. This is the destruction of 2/3 of the operational fleet. And in a closed body of water, in just one operational cycle, literally within a week, the entire Putin Shadow Fleet was wiped out. Even if you take into account that some ships were damaged more than once, even if they were hit again, it doesn't matter. This number is critical for the Russians. People asked in the comments, but what about the environment? So I'll answer that question. I've already replied in the comments. Our drones strike directly at the superstructure. They don't hit the side of the tanker, meaning they deprive the tanker of control. After that, the Russians tow it back to port and it doesn't go anywhere else. I think you've seen in the videos how precisely our drones hit the bridge. The core of the damaged ships are D2 tankers, and they're about 7,000 tons, around 140 meters long. In other words, the ones they plan to use to transport fuel to Crimea. They were coming from Yeysk and Azov, from Taganrog, trying to reach Crimea. Listen, but explain this to me. At first, 2 tankers, well, that could probably already be taken as a warning when the drones struck. Then another dozen tankers, then another dozen, and yet they still keep going in groups. The Russians are sending these tankers without any escort. Let's send them to Crimea. Well, fine, but the crews of these tankers have no understanding at all, meaning the vulnerability of this fleet is structural. They were moving here as a completely defenseless dense mass in the middle of the sea without any escort or warships. Otherwise, our drones and warships, especially the warships, would have taken them out even without any onboard weapons. So they didn't think it through. Well, let's pretend. So with hoses, no one will even notice. The closure of this Azov Canal and Kerch is a completely different level. This is an administrative admission by the Russians themselves that the waters are no longer safe for navigation as such. In other words, Russia is blocking its own logistics there. And of course, there's also the blow to grain exports. So they didn't really consider this component enough, but it's a colossal catastrophe, yet another accompanying one. A side effect, but a very serious one. That is, almost a quarter of Russia's wheat exports pass through the Sea of Azov. In other words, both the Rostov region and Krasnodar Krai, Russia's leading grain-producing regions, are located on the shores of the Sea of Azov. The market reacted instantly. September wheat futures soared, rising to their highest level in 6 weeks. As a result, grain carriers physically piled up in the port of Azov. They can't leave because the Sea of Azov is closed. And as for Crimea, that's it. How are they going to get fuel now? This is the backbone of the entire operation. In other words, the Sea of Azov essentially remained the last such a relatively safe alternative for supplying fuel to Crimea. That's it. Now this option has been closed off by the Russian Federation itself. As you can imagine, the shortage will only keep growing, and in just a week, Putin has lost 2/3 of his fleet in the Sea of Azov. The forced blockade of 2 key waterways is causing economic ricochet through grain exports. And I'll talk about this a bit later. It's just a complete collapse. They can't even manage to harvest the crops. There aren't enough ships. Russia has several times fewer ships than trucks on land. I think everyone understands that. And at sea, there are no shelters. So paralyzing movement in the Sea of Azov turned out to be even easier than in the land corridors. That's all there is to it. The wobbly jellyfish has finally met its end. And all this is in addition to the global fuel crisis and the strikes on Russia's oil refineries. Now the Botox golem will once again call another meeting where he'll hand out assignments that are completely meaningless. They have nothing to do with reality. Only a fool could fail to notice that things are just getting worse and worse for the Russian Federation. And now it seems that Trump has also cooled toward his balding counterpart, giving the green light to strike Russian oil refineries until Putin sits down at the negotiating table. In short, Putin won't sit down at the negotiating table, so the deneutralization operation will continue. And in response today, the Russians launched a ballistic strike on Kyiv. Once again, windows in houses were shattered, the roadway was torn up, and there's a crater there. They claimed they were targeting places where drones are assembled and launched. I've said many times already that after each such statement, the number of drones flying over Russian territory only increases. So let's record this for the sake of history, so to speak. Ukraine has already wiped out almost 50% of Russia's oil refining capacity. It has taken out 2/3 of the shadow fleet in the Sea of Azov, forced Russia to close the Sea of Azov and the canal, while Putin continues to strike houses, garages, and roads. He's absolutely insane. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It's important. You can do it right now without putting it off. We are fighting Putin's propaganda, and together it will be much easier for us to do this. So subscribe. Meanwhile, in Crimea, restrictions have also been introduced on cash withdrawals. VTB Bank has imposed restrictions, and apparently there will soon be a shortage of cash rubles on the peninsula. So for now, it's only VTB, and the limits have been drastically reduced, by 10 times and 6 times respectively. So what's happening? Crimeans can't even get cash anymore, and soon everything there will be paid for in cash. This is exactly where Medvedev's famous phrase, by the way, said in Crimea, fits perfectly. There's no money, but you hang in there. According to local reports, the supply of real estate has sharply increased. In Crimea, So those who are smarter have started putting both apartments and houses up for sale. Once they realize there won't be gasoline for a very long time, the process will speed up, believe me. Because if there's no gasoline, there will be nothing at all, absolutely nothing. Well, just imagine, how do they think this will work? Ukraine won't destroy the Kerch Bridge? Yes, of course it will. When the right moment comes, it will definitely destroy it. Ukraine is still giving those who want to escape a chance to get out of there. There are no people, no visitors, no money. I'm quoting the director of the Sevastopol Aquarium. He said that for now things are more or less okay, but the situation is very, very difficult. And a year ago, this director was already talking about how difficult the situation was, by the way. I can only imagine how difficult it is now. You know what's most interesting? This director of the Sevastopol Aquarium, I remember him, he's the very same director who hung a portrait of Kadyrov on the aquarium wall next to a portrait of Zhukov. Do you remember that story, when even the most patriotic folks in Sevastopol were outraged, asking what Kadyrov had to do with the great victory? Someone even started tearing that portrait off the wall. In the end, both Kadyrov's and Zhukov's portraits were removed. And today I came across an interesting comment, but this time from St. Petersburg. There's no hot water, no gasoline, no mobile internet. July 11th, 2026, St. Petersburg. Well, the main thing is that there's still greatness. And most importantly, Putin, somewhere down on the minus 50th floor in his dungeons, keeps saying, just wait, you need to endure a little longer, soon everything will get better. Meanwhile, Ukraine and Ukrainians are simply performing an incredible, genuine feat in every episode. We have an important fundraiser for the defense forces of Ukraine. Today, we are continuing to raise funds for drones for our paratroopers. The 7th Rapid Response Corps of the Air Assault Forces, which is defending and striking the enemy in one of the hottest sectors near Pokrovsk. And the paratroopers have recorded a video message for you. Please take a look.
Бажаю міцного десантного здоров'я. 7-й корпус швидкого реагування ДШВ б'є ворога на найгарячішій ділянці фронту під Покровськом. Ми нарощуємо наші спроможності по ударам на оперативно-тактичну глибину. Закуповуємо станції, зв'язок для розвідувальних та ударних дронів. Разом з глядачами каналу Бориса Тізенгаузена відкриваємо збір на Middle Strike 7-го корпусу. Наша мета – 1 мільйон гривень. Слава Україні! Слава ДШВ!
Let's help our paratroopers who are relentlessly striking the enemy, simply wiping them out. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. There you'll find the details for donations for those who want to help from Ukraine and from abroad. And there's always a QR code in the corner. That's for those watching on other channels. It also leads to the fundraiser. With your help, our paratroopers will strike the enemy hard and even more effectively. Let's do it. And now, the relevant news from the oil and gas superpower. It's already funny to even say that. Kazakhstan has set up 59 checkpoints on the border to stop the illegal export of gasoline to the Russian Federation. This has been reported by the media. What a disgrace. There, the booze-loving deputy Gurulyov was outraged, saying this isn't neighborly, and questioning what Kazakhstan thinks it's doing. Indeed, it's not very neighborly. See how they're talking now? But attacking Ukraine in a rat-like way, that was apparently very neighborly. But let's recall, by the way, how recently Russian propagandists and deputies were threatening Kazakhstan, and now they're practically begging for gasoline on their knees. For example, there's a Russian propagandist and TV host, Sergei Mordan, who commented after the strike on the Russian Orsk oil refinery. He claimed that Ukrainian drones were allegedly launched from Kazakhstan's territory and called for a raid into Kazakhstan and a sweep in Astana. So after the scandal, he deleted this post, but the internet remembers everything. There's also the political analyst Dmitry Drobnitsky. On Solovyov's channel, he stated that after Ukraine, Kazakhstan is the next problem. He added that Nazi processes could also start there. See how it is? In other words, they're already preparing the ground. As I understand it, he called to solve the problem the same way they wanted to solve it with Ukraine. After this, Kazakhstan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued an official protest. Vyacheslav Nikonov, a State Duma deputy from United Russia, Putin's party, stated that Kazakhstan simply did not exist and that its territory is, I quote, a great gift from Russia and the Soviet Union. After this, Kazakhstan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs summoned the Russian ambassador. Another United Russia deputy, Yevgeny Fyodorov, claimed that Russia has the right to demand the return of territories that were transferred to Kazakhstan after the collapse of the USSR. He also advocated for, I quote, the restoration of a unified state with Kazakhstan, in effect, the absorption of Kazakhstan. In other words, they are constantly threatening Kazakhstan, and not just Kazakhstan, they threaten everyone. And now they're whining that the Kazakhs aren't letting poor Russians in to buy gasoline. That's Russia for you. You know what amazes me the most? After getting smacked by Ukraine, the Russians run to complain to the UN. I mean, how depraved and utterly lost do you have to be to attack Ukraine and then go whining to the UN? Why don't you call the lottery hotline while you're at it? Russian taxi drivers are massively refusing rides due to a shortage of gasoline. They're complaining in Voronezh, and in the Tomsk and Novosibirsk regions, they're switching to remote work because of the fuel shortage. Putin, come on, give us more, keep it coming. Russians have sharply increased their purchases of foreign real estate. This is already in anticipation of mobilization. Indeed, they are afraid of mobilization. Here, I have some data. Demand for real estate in Georgia has doubled in recent months. In Greece and Cyprus, it has increased by 46% and 63% respectively. I've repeatedly come across posts from Russians themselves saying they're convinced that the crazy old man will go for escalation and ramp up mobilization. That is, it won't be officially announced. It never really stopped anyway, but they'll start sending out draft notices en masse and grabbing people off the streets. There are investigations, more than one, showing that the Russian Ministry of Defense is preparing infrastructure and training grounds for this. But I'd like to remind Russians that the average life expectancy of mobilized Russians on the front line is between 20 and 35 minutes. In assault units, meaning what will happen is that they will be sent to the front in groups, hastily trained and immediately thrown into assaults. Well, what else could they do? They don't know how to fly drones. You have to learn that, and they don't have any other specialties. Even to be an artilleryman, you need to study. There won't be any time for training, so of course they'll just stupidly seize ground, centimeter by centimeter, with local assaults. These are the new assault troops. They won't even see their enemy's face. They'll just be taken apart by drones for spare parts, and that's it. Let me remind you of the words of the Russian war correspondent and propagandist, Sladkov. The situation is such that the enemy has 10 drones for every one of our advancing assault troops. So Botox Medusa just wants to drown Russia in blood up to its neck. Maybe in this way, at least someone will go to fight. Yeah, no one will go. I recently watched a clip of Solovyov, and I'm telling you guys, stand up. Where are you going? Where are you going? What are you croaking about there? Who? By the way, China has strictly warned Russia against carrying out a nuclear strike on Ukraine. Vladimir Zelensky reported this. The Kremlin's underground dweller has only two options left to somehow turn the situation around. I mean, of course, he could try to advance inch by inch, but in a couple of months he won't have a single oil refinery left. There will be no grain, no food, so something needs to be decided. That's why he has only two options left. Mobilization and a nuclear strike. And apparently, foreseeing this, China said, no, don't even think about it. Don't even think about it, you Botox maggot. Mobilization is also a complete disaster. That is, it would mean an accelerated economic collapse with all the accompanying perks that come with it. And now the grain crisis is overlapping with the fuel crisis. I just looked at some statistics here. They already have nowhere to store or load the grain. The southern ports through which they traditionally exported grain have all come to a halt. According to estimates from market participants, Russian market participants, a transport collapse is possible within a week. In other words, there simply won't be enough vehicles to transport the harvest. Plus, rain is expected, so the rain will force them to keep the grain either in trucks or out in the open. This guarantees loss and spoilage. Right now, the Russians are urgently trying to export some of the grain through Azerbaijan and Turkey. But these routes require large-scale subsidies and are much less efficient than sea transport. In terms of throughput capacity, Taman definitely cannot replace the southern ports. The facilities just aren't the same. The conclusion, so what is already being recorded, you know what? As of July 1st, the Russians had threshed 1.5 million hectares compared to 4.5 million hectares a year earlier. So just imagine, they are falling behind. 3 times already. These are colossal losses, and this is the key difference from the oil crisis. Grain has strict time constraints, just 7 to 10 days. From the moment it ripens, it needs to be harvested, otherwise the ears will shatter. This makes the grain crisis simply unmanageable, and it's even worse. Fuel, maybe, but the outcome is very simple. In addition to the absolutely obvious rise in food prices, there will be a loss of a significant part of the harvest. Mass bankruptcies of agricultural enterprises in the Russian Federation are also expected. This is in addition to the fuel crisis. Yeah, the old man managed it. And now they're going to show him some pretty slides. That's it, we've defeated everyone. Now Gerasimov will say something there. We've taken Konstantinovka again. In general, I think many people already realize that the old man is not in his right mind. But he doesn't stop. Someone needs to stop him. I think that in the near future, perhaps such a brave person will be found. And if not, Russia will plunge straight into the abyss. Well, we won't grieve too much about it. And you, friends, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Subscribe to this channel, don't forget, and let's help our paratroopers. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. Have a peaceful day, everyone, and glory to Ukraine.